Thank you very much, John. I hope everybody can hear me loud and clear. Welcome to this first Res Forum live session. I'm thrilled, to be honest, that we're doing this. We're trying new things. As John said, we have a wide range of Res Forum members and friends from across the world. We have about 130 people in total joining the session in the Americas, Europe, and Asia. So thank you all for your continued support of Res Forum. For us at Res, it continues to, of course, be a challenge how we navigate COVID-19. Talking about mobility in a time when the world is infinitely less mobile. We ourselves, of course, have had to rethink our existing program of events for the rest of the year. But at the same time, there's also been some very exciting developments which we'll be touching upon in future virtual sessions as well. The first of those is, of course, look out for the notification that will come out to you in the coming days, but we're making all of our Learning Lab content free for a period of time. So you'll all be receiving login instructions for that, and it really does contain a wealth of information about GM, practical help and support, and various other chunks of learning. So, I'd highly recommend taking a look there. We also, of course, have our risk and policy analytics tools, which continue to, I think, help organizations to make informed decisions about how to respond to crises, such as that which we face now. And then, of course, our research program, and today's agenda is centered very much around our research program. We've recently produced papers on working in hostile environments, on duty of care, virtual assignments, remote working, and of course, this COVID-19 study. This has been done in partnership with Cranfield School of Management and also Newcastle University, Newcastle Business School. And the results of this survey will actually be published in approximately 2 weeks in partnership with EY. So please do look out for that. And last of all, the very last update I give is a very exciting one for Res Forum. As the world is going increasingly digital, so is Res Forum. Do look out for our concept being released in the next weeks. It's called Connected GM. And it really is about leading digital transformation in the management of cross-border staff, touching on compensation, compliance, digital relocation services with a focus on employee experience, and of course, global employee and traveller tracking. So some very exciting things coming out of Res Forum. But for right now, I will switch over to our COVID-19 survey. First of all, I'd like to introduce my two co-panelists. First of all, Michael Dickmann from Cranfield School of Management.
Hello, David. Thank you.
Thank you. And Benjamin Bader, live and direct from Newcastle in the northeast of England. Hello, Ben.
Hi. Hello, everybody.
There we are. Great to have you guys here. So obviously you helped us to put together the survey, and we had a very high response rate to this survey. Now, for me, a couple of things, key takeaways that jumped out of it. First of all, 80%, just under 79% of survey respondents were in some way surprised or extremely surprised and very much taken by surprise with the current crisis. For me, that was pretty surprising because, yes, perhaps the scale is different, but this is not the first major incident that global mobility has been faced with in the last year. So that was one thing that jumped out at me. Secondly, also another statistic was 49% of respondent organizations did not have a pre-existing business continuity plan. And that, for me, was, again, a fascinating statistic to see that companies are really being taken by surprise. 28% have actually been obliged to develop one only as a consequence of the current crisis. So there are two things that jumped out on me, but I don't want to speak too much, of course. So perhaps, Michael, I can go to you first and ask for your reflections on the survey and our findings.
Yeah, thank you, David, and hello, everyone. Let's do a bit of a role reversal, because when we did the survey a few days ago, we got a lot of data, of course, and we will represent lots of this data in the report in about 2 weeks' time. But what I wanted to concentrate today on is actually some of the value add beyond the data. And so what we're doing with the data is to develop a GM COVID crisis framework consisting of 4 parts. The first one you already mentioned a bit, David, the high surprise rate of people who are, or of organizations who hadn't done all the planning yet. So the first part is about crisis planning, which then would lead to be normally better at the second part, which is about crisis action. What should companies do in terms of a crisis. The third part is about short-term crisis impact. And the fourth part is about long-term developments of this crisis. So let me go very briefly before I hand over to Ben, who gives a bit more detail through these four parts. So in terms of crisis planning, companies were hit by surprise with COVID-19, and a lot of companies didn't have emergency policies in place and deployed. So there is a surprise for us. And when you read the report, you can see some part of where some companies can improve. But obviously, what we're doing is we're giving an industry global mobility perspective rather than an individual organizational perspective. We looked at health risk mitigations and the coordination with key stakeholders. That's actually much better in terms of what company have done. So if they have done this, they would have developed better actions now. And so moving into crisis action, what we looked at is, for example, how they advised, assisted, and evacuated their assignees, the quality of communication, the implementation of adequate medical insurance, which was the highest data and supported and done by organization, and some data on suspension of business travel, for example, which interestingly, while essentially all international travel was suspended, some domestic travel still is going on for crucial business activities. And that very likely depends also on industry and country. For us, fascinating are the crisis impact issues. So in the short term, we're seeing that companies believe a negative impact on global mobility objective achievement. There is a pronounced risk on mental health, so exceptional stress of assignees, lots of worry about their family, loneliness and isolation. But there's also a host country risk that the assignee performance will suffer dramatically because adjustment is suffering, networking is suffering, and on-job performance is suffering. And in reality, we also looked at vendor cooperation, and that doesn't seem to be a big issue for companies as such. These negative health and performance issues right now have an indication of what companies should do now, and when things hopefully return to normal or the resemblance of normality, what they then can do. And I'm sure that they will have to balance different pressures. So the one pressure will be probably that there might be a mini boom and very much to do, while another pressure from the assignees might be, I want to visit my parents, I want to visit my friends or something like that, want to go on vacation. So there will be some pressures that companies have to decide on, and some of them seem to work on a case-to-case basis, while others prefer global approaches. Lastly, and really fascinating, is the long-term crisis impact. So we looked at this, and people, to be fair, about half of organizations believe that there won't be much long-term impact, but a sizable other part, so normally about a third, feel that there will be an increased use of virtual work after the pandemic, and we talked about 1 to 3 years afterwards. There will be reduced business travel, reduced short and long-term assignment activity, and overall, some companies felt they might even decrease international operations. This has a whole raft of implications for global talent and leadership development, for local talent development and investment in local talent, for career planning, succession systems, technology investment, and ultimately a rethink of the global employee value proposition and how global mobility professionals may approach the whole area of global mobility and shape their organization's approaches. Okay, we'll talk more about this obviously in the report, but I want to hand over to Ben, who's going to go into duty of care and other considerations around our data. Ben.
Thank you, Michael. So the first thing that really struck us when we saw how the crisis really unfolded was how well prepared companies are in terms of duty of care. And we know that because we actually did a survey on that last year in December, and the quarterly research report has been just published. And what's very nicely reflected there is the caring about employees and the importance of health insurance, medical things, and everything like that pretty much corresponds to what we find now. And when we look in this particular survey and the data, what we find is there's a lot of overlap between companies in terms of short-term and immediate assessment of risk, immediate assessment of the impact and situation. So that is more or less similar for all companies alike. And what's also similar, there's a tremendous level of uncertainty connected with that. So for the breakout room sessions and discussion, it would be really interesting to catch up a bit how this has changed, because this is a very recent survey, but yet data collection was closed already 2 weeks ago, and I don't need to tell you that in these times the situation changes daily essentially, and many things we didn't know back then 2 weeks ago we may know now, but then again there's still many things in the near-term future and even long-term future we don't know yet either. And so what we did in the report, we also asked about what do you think is going to happen, like in the, as Michael said, in the longer term future. And it's interesting because when I said in the immediate response, there was a big overlap between companies. We see a spread in the longer term. So while some companies are still more pessimistic in the approach, others are rather optimistic and have an assumption of it's going to go back to normal. So if you think about things like adapting to foreign cultures, if there's going to be an increased risk due to COVID-19, and only 1 in 5 companies said yes, this is a high to extreme risk. The vast majority says it's a moderate risk at best, or even less of a risk. The ability to perform the job properly, the global assignee job, is a moderate risk for half of the companies. But that is mainly related to the uncertainty connected with that. So when they say risk, I mean, there's always a certain risk, but it's not a prediction per se as what's going to happen. But it very much depends on how the situation is going to unfold. Where companies are very similar in their assessment is it's a big risk what different countries and governments are doing. For instance, risks such as enforced isolation. This is not just absolutely unpredictable at the moment. It's also going to be a big risk in the next month and probably years to come. And if we really look into the future in terms of 1 to 3 years, and when we designed the survey, we said when the corona pandemic is over. But we don't know if it's really going to be over in a year from now, but in the next 1 to 3 years, what does it mean? And then interesting finding is that 60% of all respondents are convinced that there's going to be an increased use of virtual work. So things like we used to do in person before, we may just continue doing that virtually because it works out. And I think this particular session is an excellent example to meet virtually and discuss things that are relevant to all of us without having to travel. Organizing work across the globe doesn't necessarily have to be done by using international assignees, at least not to that extent. And that is also reflected in business travel. So 40% believe that business travel is going to be reduced, although there's another 1/3 who believes now it's going to go back to normal. And as Michael said initially, reducing short-term assignments and also reducing long-term assignments may be a result of this crisis. But then again, if we look at the verbal comments and the information we got in addition to the survey, the underlying communication to us was always, well, the problem is we don't know that, so we're making decisions under uncertainty, and so all we can do is basically look case by case, day by day, week